Welcome back to the Listening Bee. Today's guest is Dean Zarras. He is a Wall Street veteran and the founder and CEO of ClearFactr, which is a tech company that he sold to Goldman Sachs. Now he's using everything that he knows to help people understand economics, money, technology, and how freedom really works. So thank you, Mr. Zarras, for being here today, and I'm so excited for our conversation today.
My pleasure, Beatrice. It's an honor to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes. And I'd love to start out with, for people just now meeting you, what are one or two major turning points in your life that brought you to where you are now?
Turning point. I suppose a notable turning point would have been getting introduced to computers in high school. Um, Little did I know that I was lucky to skip over the use of punch cards. Yeah, I'm old,
Punch
but I
card.
found that out in college, right? Like, oh, you didn't use punch cards, man? Wow. But I took a real liking to this thing, programming, and was doing it as of yesterday. I've been
Oh,
accused of
wow.
being good at it, and I just enjoy it. I would call myself a builder, let's say.
Mhm.
I also, by the way, like building stone walls, a little bit of my Greek heritage in me, but yeah, I like building things, and you can build pretty much anything these days with software, and
Yes.
I can use software to solve problems for other people, and that has served me well. So,
Very cool.
another, I suppose, turning point is as a result of making a certain group of people um, happy. They literally said to me, "No, dude, you were the only one who actually listened to us and gave us what we asked for, and you did it in way less time than we expected, and therefore we'd like you to be our call yourself whatever you want tech guy for our." New energy trading startup, and that was in 2003. And that wound up doing very, very well. And in some ways, that allowed me to move into ClearFactr, where I still am now,
Yes.
13 years or so um, after writing the first lines of code for that. So all of those events were definitely important turning points.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And you're definitely a builder because if I'm not mistaken, you've helped start like 3 startup companies that are now successful, including ClearFactr, right?
Um, Certainly, this energy trading company, um, ClearFactr, I guess, um, other people say it's worth a bunch of money. Let's
Yeah.
say my wife is maybe not yet convinced, but she's hung in there, coming up on 39 years of
Oh,
marriage,
wow. Congratulations.
next month. Yeah. Uh, so that's been very important in lots of ways to continue to have her, marital support.
Yeah.
Startups aren't for the faint of heart.
No.
So
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, that's beautiful. Um, I would love to talk more about how, we're in this world now where AI is letting a lot of people create anything. I know tons of high schoolers that are creating apps and vibe coding all these things and creating a lot of things in this world that we're able to have this freedom to do so. What do you see as AI is emerging further and further, how it's impacting economics and how high schoolers are learning in the world? What is your view on that?
Well, I should probably come right out and say that I had some skepticism about the underlying tech of
Mm,
what was admittedly, almost miraculous to watch, right? Those initial chat, let's call it those initial chat GPT experiences that everyone remembers, right? Like, incredible. Um, Many years ago, I was exposed to I say exposed because it's difficult. I would never call myself a mathematician, but I worked alongside a true, like PhD level mathematician. And he explained at the time a lot of the underlying math that nowadays we, power up these large language models with. And so I knew coming right out of the gate that the hallucination problem that people talk about a lot now was not going to be solved with
mhm,
the approaches that people are currently using. And for that reason, um, I did not actually jump all in into the AI race, so to speak. Let's say a race to add some kind of even phonyish AI component to ClearFactr right out of
mhm,
the gate, um, because I knew that, especially with mathematically driven models, um, in spreadsheets and so on, right? Where the trust of the model is key. In fact, one of the whole points behind ClearFactr is to be able to explain the math and explain the reasoning that
Yeah.
is inside this model. Um, the idea of a hallucination slipping into that somehow or another, um, I thought, well, gee, those just have no place. And I might be, um, I don't know, conflating a couple concepts here, but suffice to say, it doesn't surprise me at all that an MIT study came out. This was, try to do my best to recount this, but the story broke a few months ago. MIT study said that 95% of AI projects at the enterprise level were not being put into production. And it's very understandable to me, because what enterprise could tolerate
Yeah.
um, a hallucination?
Mhm.
Um, Spreadsheets, by the way, are already known to be largely, or very commonly filled with, or filled, but contain errors. Or there have been other studies that point to all of the unknown errors and whatever, and of course happen accidentally, but they're in spreadsheets and billions of these spreadsheets around the world. And so they have their own problems already, right? And to sort of compound upon all of that, with the hallucination problem, seemed like a something I wanted to avoid. Now, perhaps all sorts of other potential applications for AI in my product, and without a doubt, the technology is amazing in many ways. I think we're at the earliest of
Mhm.
innings of where this is going to wind up. Um, but um, uh, and I certainly wouldn't dissuade anyone from learning as much as they can about it. But uh, be careful.
Yeah.
Let me just leave it at that.
Yeah. I'm with you on the same in the same boat, because I feel like whenever there's something big and new that comes into our world, there's a lot of opportunities that we can see with it, and there's also a lot of costs. And AI has a lot of good things and a lot of drawbacks, especially with hallucinations like you mentioned. So, very curious to see where it goes in the future.
Yeah, and look, I've already said, I'll say it again. I would never call myself a hardcore math person. In fact, from the software point of view, the people that do serious math, PhD level math in software all the time, that's not me. I call myself an application builder,
Mhm.
and I've worked with those PhD mathematicians in the past. Um, and there are some incredibly bright people that are trying to take completely different approaches to solving this issue, um, and in fact, two words being put together now more and more that I think we'll start seeing them more and more in public are the words deterministic AI. Right,
Mm.
the idea that we can use the massive computer firepower that's available now that was not available, I think almost 30 years ago, when this friend of mine, coworker, was telling me about genetic algorithms and things like that. Right, um, so harnessing all this tremendous uh, CPU horsepower, but doing it in a deterministic way. That will usher in a whole new level of applications and solutions, and um, so it's going to it's an exciting time.
Yeah.
So leave it at that.
Quick question, what is deterministic?
I mean, literally, where you put it's what every piece of software wants to be, right? It's given given the same inputs, the software will operate on those inputs and always produce the same output, guaranteed, right?
Okay, so, like, no
Um,
hallucination.
it just like with a probability of 1.0, right? If you simplest piece of software, you have it two numbers, 1 and 2. The
Mhm.
software is going to add them together. The answer has to be 3 every single time. If the probability of that is not 1.0, you have a problem. And yeah, and unfortunately, that's just um, y- the way the Gen AI works, the way the large language models work. They're probabilistic, and that means there is a non-zero probability that it will do something that's sort of out of bounds. Or yeah, let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. It's probably already showing. I would never call myself an AI expert either. But look, over the next year and more, I'm going to be taking the already very big ClearFactr product and doing some. I'm going to be adding some kind of AI aspect to it, but it has to be a deterministic one.
Yeah,
Leave it.
that will be exciting to see how that goes. And so now that we've talked a little bit about AI, I want to talk about economics with you and
Sure.
about what you think
My true passion.
how yeah, your true passion. Tell me more. Tell me everything that how you got into it and what you think about maybe we can talk about America and our markets and how the world has evolved.
Sure. Um, my origin story, as people have said, not of the startup, let's say, but of my, because people talk about this. So I'll just have to come out right out and say I call myself a small L libertarian,
Mhm.
what people would call a classical liberal, going back to, let's say, the 1700s or so, that sort of definition of the word. And there's also a bit of a mashup these days, libertarian plus conservative. People will call it conservatarian, I think. And I think um, there was an event I could probably nail down to, I think, sophomore year in college, perhaps. Literally reading Wall Street Journal, reading the letters section there, and there was a letter or an editorial. No, I think it was an editorial by Virginia Postrel, who went on to be, or maybe at the time she was the editor of Reason magazine. And it sort of opened my eyes to this whole other world of thought of approaching um, uh, the relationship of people to each other and to the state and to the economy and so on. And it was just so thought provoking. And I began to dig into this more. This was a long time ago. No internet, whatever. Somehow or another, I learned of the Cato Institute,
Wait a minute.
and I became a supporter of them pretty quickly. Some meager donation, but I was on their radar. Yeah, and this is all pre-email too, right? But it all sort of grew out of there. And the more I was able to read and get exposed to more and more things, and eventually wound up on people's mailing lists, and those things just have a way of multiplying. Even back then, they did. I was just exposed to more and more of this worldview, let's call it. And it just really resonated with me. I think what really began to drive things was that, I realized, like, oh my God, well, this is when we talk about the economy and we talk about governments that now get their noses into almost every aspect of the economy, just understanding economics and understanding some of these basic concepts, how humans interact with each other. And that's a nod basically to Ludwig von Mises' tome, Human Action, sort of one of the godfathers of the Austrian School of Economics. Cinder block thick book,
Wow.
difficult reading, to put it mildly. Um, but yeah, breaking down economics to really just being, two and more people interacting with each other
Huh.
freely. Um, and when there's no coercion, they will only act with each other if they make each other better off, right? So if one party is not forced to deal with the other, then by definition, you have a little system, or you can, of course, scale this up, but you have a little system now where it's um, constantly in a sort of a virtuous spiral upward
Yeah.
to society's benefit, right? Because again, it boils down to that one person acting in their interest, you could say, but the other person's also acting in their interest. And as long, where's the role of government then? Okay, well then government has to say, well, okay, we're going to all agree on the rules of the road, so to speak, right? And you two, even though you're making each other better off and you're trading freely, let's say, with each other, exchanging freely, sometimes people would say, that you're not trampling the rights of a third party.
Mm.
Okay. maybe you two making each other better off would actually make a third person worse off. Well, we got to watch out for that, and we got to make sure that that doesn't happen. Anyway, I'm really sort of
No,
going off
that was
on
an amazing
tangents here.
example.
All right, but
Thank you.
i- this is the basic of these are some of the basics of libertarian thought, um, and yeah, that train of thought can run into some esoteric kind of fringe places, um, but at the core, I believe very strongly that you want to make it as easy as possible for people to trade with each other, um, to create new solutions, in the form of businesses, perhaps, let's say, to make each other better off. I mean, there's
Mm,
absolutely a profit motive in there, of course, but it could also be purely altruistic, right? You might get this incredible feeling to yourself of being altruistic. That's great, but it needs to be voluntary.
mm,
That's one of the problems today. Like, oh, let's just force everyone to contribute only one more
yeah.
dollar because we have great intentions. We're going to round up a bunch of money, and then we're going to do something good with it. All right, but who decides what the good is, right? In fact, that's coming back to Cato full circle. I first heard that phrase, and now my kids almost sort of twitch at the phrase. Who decides, Dad? Right? Who decides whatever, right?
Yeah.
Um, and some things sure have to be decided
Mm,
at the societal level, but the moment it's a pure majority, the so-called 50 plus one, right? Well, then that would mean that the 50 plus one could decide with good intentions to take all the property of the other 49%, right? And redistribute it or whatever they might want to do, right? Something outrageous, right? Well, then that's pure democracy.
mm,
And thankfully we don't have that. And thankfully the Constitution, at least at the outset, tried to put guardrails on that kind of
right.
stuff,
And
right?
protecting
But
our rights.
there have been, let's just say things have changed a lot since
Yeah.
um, since it was originally written.
Yeah. I know that you talk a lot about property rights. Do you want to say more about the importance of that and how that affects humans?
Well, you almost have to define what it is. And again, I'm not a
Yeah.
formal economist by any means, right? But I also believe that this is not beyond the reach of high schoolers.
Yes.
It's pretty fundamental. Um, if you produce something with your own efforts, your mind, you write some software and you produce some code, or you write something down on a piece of paper, maybe it's your homework, but you own that, right? That's your property.
Mm,
Um, you eventually get a paying job, and you're exchanging your labor for the cash, right? You prefer the cash, and the employer prefers your labor, right? So you're both made better off by that trade, right? Um, you have to answer to the employer. If you don't like the employer, free to leave, and uh, ideally there should be lots of alternatives out there for you, right? So if the employer is not, you don't agree with their worldview, or you don't agree with the way they treat their customers or whatever, right? You should be free to, as easily as possible, start up a better alternative, and perhaps take all the customers of the former employer that you don't really like, right? Um, Society would win from that, right?
mm,
But property rights, yeah. So now you've gotten a paycheck. All right, so yeah, your cash obviously is your property. To the extent now, yeah, and then of course you can literally we don't barter anymore. So the cash actually makes what was hard, bartering, right, makes it a lot easier. That gets into the whole theory of what is money actually,
mhm.
right? That's why you want stable money as opposed to money whose value you can't predict or can't count on. Um, get back to property rights, Dean. It's all interrelated, right? The
Yes.
point is, if the government, perhaps a you know a misguided government, a government with good intentions, um, but still, perhaps misguided, perhaps not respecting the property rights. Look up the takings clause in the Constitution. Okay. And in fact, I'll just go there. Google what Joe Biden had to say about the takings clause way back when. That's out there. You can find that, and it's very interesting. If the government can just arbitrarily keep taking your property through taxes or otherwise, always with the best intentions, well, now you're in that place where who decides, all right, so they've rounded up a bunch of money, they have good intentions, but now the whole situation now is inherently more political because now through a process and it's inherently more corruptible too, right? Because now,
Why?
especially nowadays, when there's a lot of money at stake, well, then there's a lot of incentive for corruption and so on. So humans are flawed, right? I don't believe that as a cohort, people who work in the government are any more righteous or moral than the rest of us who are not in government. So again, just through, look at what's going on in California right now, right? Is Dean going to defend the billionaires at stake? Yeah, a little bit. Oh, it's only 5% and they're billionaires. They won't miss it. Okay, but where does that stop, right? So, it's their property. And okay, they worked in California while they made the money and so on. Okay. But I've heard language like, oh, but we, the citizens of California deserve that, more. They're already getting a lot of tax income from these billionaires. But I've heard people say it's out there. But we deserve more, right? Because they have good intentions with the funding, with that additional funding. Somehow they never look at the spending side of the balance sheet and of the cash flow statement, let's say, right? But anyway, I know I've said multiple mouthfuls here, and anyone would be free to rewind the tape and point out where I've conflated things and so on and so forth. The point is, this does become a mess. It's a mess. If anything I've just said sounds like a mess, it's a mess. When you allow the sort of tyranny of the majority, let's say, to suddenly look upon, and I say with envy, look upon the property of others and say, you know what? If I just the people who could round up the power to take just a little bit more of that property and control it now through a political process, it's just a very horrible. It's a horrible, very slippery slope for society as a whole. Why don't I stop there?
That was beautifully said, and I have so many more questions, but I'm trying to figure out which one to ask. I think that a lot of people my age don't truly understand the implications of if a government taxes people that have a lot of money and like recycles it through the economy and gives it to people with lesser amounts of money. From someone who just looks at that's my answer, like, oh, that's good, they're making people equal. But I think that there's a lot of gray area where we don't see all the true implications that makes. Like if we were talking about AI and now there's this whole question of should we implement a UBI, universal basic income, where everyone gets like a same amount? Like,
yeah,
there's like problems with that I hear with incentive and things like that. Can you explain a little bit more about like what's the problem of redistributing this wealth?
Yeah, of course. Well, there's it again. I smile because I'm sort of in this business of math. Even though I'm not a mathematician, my product helps people who are better with math than me, helps people explain the math and so on. The problem is that the government, and look, I'm not an anarchist. Let's just get that. I joke about that with my let's just say friends who don't completely agree with me. I have those friends too, and I love them. And it's I'm not an anarchist, right? I want limited government, more like was envisioned a couple hundred years ago. And by the way, that's a lot cheaper. Okay, you just don't need as much money to run that kind of government.
Yeah.
So it keeps more of the money and the finances in the hands of the people who originally made it. And some people are just you got to just call it out. Some people are better at making money with the money they already have than other people. Other people are pretty good at losing all of their own money for one reason or another. But again, with the best of intentions, when the government rounds up resources, right, with the intention of redistributing it, well, let's just stop right there. The government can only do this by first taking the money away from the people who originally had it, back to the property rights issue,
Mhm.
one way or another, right? They round up this money, but it's not like, let's say you are asked, somehow they take an additional dollar from you, um, and now they have the best intentions. They want to give a dollar to someone else who they think deserves the money more than you. And you have to look at it that way, because that is what's going on. Otherwise, they wouldn't. They truly believe that this other person would be better
Deserves.
off with the dollar than you would. But
Mhm.
the problem is, it's not a dollar for dollar, because there's the cost of the government itself. So I don't have a statistic handy, but I think you can already see, again, the math, right? Um, the cost of running the government, of administering all the policies, even all the things that were never voted for, right? But actually come up out of through the administrative state, what some people call the fourth branch of government. Um, all that stuff has to be paid for. So when you round up those additional dollars, you then take out a bunch of dollars to pay for the government. And then you have some money left over, and you send that down the line in the form of programs that some people think are great. Some people will argue about which program and so on and so forth. And now you have the people, fighting with each
Yeah.
other, literally or figuratively. Or
Mhm.
I could say that the other way around, figuratively or literally.
Mhm.
Um, over which program, right? And another basic economic concept here. A lot of people assume that this pie of money, right, is a fixed pie, right? They see a pie, and they're like, hey, and they call out, oh, this person has way too big of slice. They can't even eat that slice. Meanwhile, these people have no slice of the pie. So we should take a lot from the person who has the big slice and give it to the people who have no slice. People have written tons of more eloquent stuff on this topic than I'm saying right now. But the point is, there's not nearly enough discussion about growing the pie. And in fact, and again, it's just math and compounding and so on, the horrific national debts that we have now, right? Well, we got there because, with the best of intentions, we spent a bunch of money. If we just froze the spending where it is, right? Okay, whatever thought process we all had collectively as a bunch of voters, this is where we've wound up. This is the size of our budget. We're in a deficit right now. If we just said, okay, freeze, stop, but let's grow the economy. Let's go all in on growing the economy. We could actually grow our way out of this problem, right? We'd be growing the pie, and therefore leaving everything exactly as it is. But now, with the pie getting larger, everyone would benefit from that. And um, and in fact, I have a ClearFactr model that demonstrates a little of this. And
Cool.
I'm trying to figure out how to best publicize it. But you're hearing it here first. So
That's so cool. Thank you. Wow. Yeah. You gave some really great examples. I think that a lot of people will be able to understand a little bit more about what this actually means. And like like you said, right now we're in a very, very big deficit and in a lot of debt with the government, like it's trillions of dollars. And the easy fast fix is just to print more money. And that's what causes the inflation. And it's like you fix it in the short run, but what are the implications in the long run?
yeah, well, this is where, again, like, capital PE professional economists, right, will debate about, where inflation actually comes from and so on and so forth. I want to just skip right over that, because I'm not a professional economist. I want to mention something else you mentioned, about the spending and so on, and the taxation um, and the billionaires. Again, it's just math, but to demonstrate how bad things really are. If you simply confiscated, which no one's talking about, but just took all of the wealth of the billionaires, at least, we're talking about, let's say, the United States, right? Just took it all. You couldn't fund the government for more than a year on that incremental block of money. But then they're broke, right? They're done. So you can't go back to that well. And in fact, to round up that money, and this is what they're facing now, or people are beginning to figure out this cause and effect in the math and so on in California. To round up all that money from those greedy billionaires, um, they would have to sell a lot of their assets, which are tied up in their companies and so on and so forth. So the companies themselves, the creators of a lot of that money, but creators of the jobs, which other people benefit from, dare I say, the whole trickle down thing, right? Sorry, that is just the way the economy works. Um, and people are very grateful for, having their jobs and being able to spend and so on and so forth, right? If, I don't know where that became a slur, but that is just the way things work, right? Money winds up in your pocket and some of it goes into the next person's pocket and so on and so forth. Somewhere along the way, that became known as trickle down economics, and somehow people call that out as being a bad thing, but that is actually just the way things work in a free economy. Um, but yeah, I think it's not pointed out nearly enough, just simple math, that we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem.
Mhm.
And simply trying to round up more revenue from the uh, people who have more money to, somehow air quote give through higher taxes, mathematically, it just winds up not working. So we have to come to grips with the spending.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely see that. Thank you for explaining all of that again. And yeah,
And I
it's
and I can imagine
Mhm.
already right now the flaming I would get through the comments and from the uh, professional economist class and so on, at least from some schools of thought. But who is this guy? He's not even
Yeah.
an economist.
Yeah, but like you say, you have friends with different views, and everyone has a different point of view based off of, how they were raised and what they've read and researched. And I think it's important for people to listen to this no matter what side and views that they have because
Well, yeah, I let's keep riffing on this because I
Sure.
think another thing that hit me somewhere along the way. Um, well, I know exactly where it was from. It was from my good friend John Tamney, who liked my writing years ago and wound up putting some of my writing out on Forbes Opinions, and which it's all still there. Um, he was the one who pointed out, like, no, and he's literally written books about this stuff that basic economics, not hard, right? And in fact, it's almost borders on gaslighting to say like, oh, we have to allow the economic thought to be, in the ivory towers of the professional economists and so on. And they're like, oh, and if you're not a trained economist, you're just not qualified to comment on this stuff. Like, no, I'm sorry. Like
Mhm.
every person acting in their own free will according to their preferences at the moment, which may be different the next moment, may be different tomorrow, for whatever reason, you change your mind on something, right? And on all your past, as Von Mises would say, all of your past human actions of last week, last month, last 10 years, you know, for whatever reason, they flip and start being different, in the future. All of that stuff just boils down to actions taken by people, and they're not hard to understand because they're your own actions. They might be hard to understand as you try to aggregate them up. They also then become incredibly unrealistic. So that was one thing that I remember in my economics classes in college. I remember like, geez, they're holding so many things constant to get that beautiful mathematical formula for supply or demand or whatever it may be, that they're not even um, modeling, to use that term. They're not even modeling a real world anymore
Yep.
because they're holding so many things constant to get their math to work that, well, okay, great. What have you proven? You have a nice formula now. It might be deterministic, right? You can put some inputs into it and you'll get the same answer out the other side. That's
Connected.
great, but you haven't modeled reality. And um and in your attempts to do so, you wind up in what Hayek most famously called the fatal conceit. That you begin to think you can, and you begin to think you have the brain power. Well,
Mhm.
you and some of your smart buddies, you can figure this stuff out if you just have all the right data, and
Mhm.
you can figure this out and run a country with it. When it's doomed to fail
Mhm.
because all of those micro actions, let's say, of all the humans, they're literally incomprehensible. So a lot of bad policy comes from misunderstanding this stuff.
Yeah, from
And
assuming
and
that
and I
you.
and I contend that uh, high schoolers, can totally understand these basic concepts because
Yes.
they all act too
Mhm.
in their
Sometimes
own self
irrationally.
in their own self interest. Yeah, if they act irrationally or to their if they fail, that's okay. As parents, sure, you don't want to see your kids fail in a truly harmful way, but it's another thing that we tend to minimize or try to minimize, try to avoid with our public policy. Failure. Failure is so important for learning. And in fact, watching other people fail, hugely important, right? Because now, like I don't have to touch a hot stove to know from hearing stories about what happens when other people have touched hot stoves. I don't have to personally experience that. That was their failing, but now most people know that you don't go around touching a hot stove. Um, you know, Extrapolate that all you want, right?
Yeah,
So success is super important, of course, but failure in some ways is equally important. It's a
yeah.
learning experience for everybody to benefit from.
Wow. Yeah, that's beautifully said, and I think internalizing that can really make a happier life for a lot of people and recognizing imperfections. And on that note, as we start to wrap up this show, what is like one piece of advice that you would give to high schoolers living in this day and age right now?
Question. Because there's so many, right? There's so
Yeah.
many good ones. I suppose go with my gut. What comes top of mind. Stay curious.
Mm.
Learn how to learn. Learn. Worth repeating. How to learn, right? Not what to learn, but how to learn.
Mm.
Um, you're probably too young. The card catalog, right? Learn how to learn. Learn in the library. All right. If you know how to use the card catalog in the library, now you can find every book. You can't memorize the location of every book, right? But if you learn how to use the card catalog, I'm really
Um,
dating myself here. I haven't even, but anyway, the point is that was the key to unlocking where every book was in the library.
mhm.
Um, you learned how to learn, and then if you stay curious, right, you'll just keep running things down, your own curiosities. Sure, you get something comes in from wherever and you say, oh, but that sounds interesting, I want to know more about that, and just run it down until you're bored.
Yeah.
But curiosity is incredible. It's an incredible force.
Yeah.
And something that should never get old. There should never be an age at which can safely say, I don't have to be curious anymore.
Mhm. I love it.
Always keeps you young.
Yes. Curiosity.
Yes.
Beautiful. Well, are you ready for our previous guest's question to you?
Drum roll. Yeah, a little nervous perhaps, but what might it be? But I'll
It's a
do my
beautiful
best.
one.
Okay.
It's what is one thing that you've always wanted to learn, but have never had time to do it?
Oh man, top of mind. So this is going to be not quite trite sounding, but it almost goes to my admitted um, misallocations of time that my 13-year-old startup has been forcing on me.
Mm.
Um, I have over the years, starting from high school, owned a whole bunch of keyboards on and off, synthesizers and so on. I'm fortunate enough to have a very nice piano sitting I'm on the second floor. It's right below me. Um, I haven't put nearly enough time. Nothing stopping me, just other than my own prioritizations and
Yeah.
preferences, my actions, my human action. Not nearly enough time in getting better and better with those keyboards. I love synthesizers, so I get half the fun for me is literally like twisting all the knobs and making the sounds as much as playing them. If I'd put just a little more time every day, every week, every month, I'd be a much better player. I'm not bad, but I'd be better. There's a bass guitar right over behind me over here.
Wow.
Um, but but wrapping this all up, I wish I had taken every single moment of all of this musical curiosity or whatever and put it into electric guitar. And I know it's still maybe not too late, but I wish I had done that. So,
Yes.
so it would be, yeah, a lot of years at this point. I'd be a pretty good guitar player at this point if I had put all that energy into uh,
Well, well,
electric guitar.
thank you for sharing your humanness.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
I don't have anything. Yeah, that's yeah, nothing more deep or profound than that. But that was very top of mind. But yeah,
right.
it goes to the whole issue of uh, yeah, we don't know how much time we have on the earth. It's and could end unexpectedly tomorrow.
Yep.
But what you do with your time is among the most important choices you'll ever make. It impacts everything. So,
Yeah, that's beautiful. Well,
uh,
thank you for spending the last few minutes, 45 minutes with me here. I really, really appreciated this. And I've learned so much, and I hope the audience have learned so much. And just thank you.
my pleasure. Thank you again.